Hey guys, I wanted to give you a bit of an update on the political game that's been going on over on the forums. I'll leave a link below, as I always do, but this is mostly for the people who already are playing it, and of course, to kind of update them, I've actually got some notes right here I'll be referring to. We're basically moving to the next step of the tutorial. We've got some basic framework, and I think we've got a good system in place, but we're going to need to do some playtesting to really see how it works out. We've effectively created a bit of a board game with role-playing attached, but I'm getting ahead of myself. The way I previously described this game was the idea of basically politics. Now, I know that sounds obvious, but what I mean by that is pure politics. That's how these kind of games are usually run, with very little actual stats involved. But it became very apparent very quickly that stats were needed, especially given the way the players were trying to play it. And some players wanted to play it some way, and some wanted to play it another way, and everyone had different expectations. Some people didn't actually want to play politicians, you know. And so we've kind of hammered things out a little bit, and over the past few weeks at this point, pushed things into a slightly new system. We have decided to keep going with the Nation of a Chain, mainly because everyone involved, including myself, has a lot of investment in a chain, and, you know, we already put all that time and work effort at why abandon it, especially since I already have some ideas we haven't even gotten to yet. The new system is designed to be very modular, which I will give credit to Carbon Cry, the player, for coming up with the general concept of this idea and the general implementation, which we then, as a group, hammered into something functional. So, the meat of the gameplay is going to revolve around the governors, okay? There are 9 at the moment. I highly suspect that number will go up over time, either due to expansion, or to conquest, or to settlement in some of the unsettled areas that still exist within this region, something like that. Regardless, they are the meat of the gameplay, and as GM, as the chair, as I call myself, no, not you, I absolutely mandate that you have to be an active player in order to be a governor. That means being available to post and read the forums at least once a day, once per 24-hour period of time, regardless of your time zone, regardless of other considerations. Now, if you have a real-life consideration, you just post saying, hey, I won't be available for X amount of time, because we understand life happens, you know, rule 0. But, you know, otherwise, under normal operating circumstances, you are available all the frickin' time. Right now we have exactly 9 players to fill that role for the 9 governors, and that was kind of a barely. Several of those players did not actually want to be governors, but were active enough to qualify and were willing to move into the slot temporarily. So, for example, if a new player wanted to come in, or one of the existing players who has kind of fallen off the map thanks to the issues we've had in the last few weeks, wants to come back and play a governor, that option is going to be open to them. And of course, expansion in the future. So, the main change to the governorial gameplay is we've switched things around a little bit. So, each region has its own stats. I'm not going to list all of them here, that's not relevant. Though they have one stat that is a currency, as in something you spend and gain, and one stat that is a rating that shows exactly how good your region's doing with regards to things like scientific progress, or internal security, or the morale of the people, health, that kind of a thing, right? The currency stat is exactly what it sounds like. It's labeled very loosely on purpose to be representative of things like the espada, or vouchers, if it's the case of Plainsdale, or anything else that requires some kind of economic fluidity of movement. It's basically your economy as a currency, like I said. Governors, of course, are going to be wanting to be improving these. They can spend resources, time, effort, and of course, currency. Most things are going to cost currency in order to accomplish things, and they can spend their own stats, which I'll get to in just a moment, in order to try and enact bills or laws or try to pass things within their area. That's the majority of the governor's gameplay, but the governors are also the national leaders. So the Senate is gone completely, as are most aspects of the previous federal government. It has been replaced by the Council of Governors, which consists of the 9 governors. Each one of them has an equal say, you know, flatten the board, and they basically represent the federal side of the government. Everything national goes through the Council of Governors. This is one of the reasons why a governor is required to be an active player, because not only are they managing their region, which could be done on like a once-per-week basis, but they're also managing the country as a whole, which requires much more active gameplay. Make sense? I don't have much else to add to that. Them being the national thing, that's a lot more towards the original envisionment of the political game. That's much more this, that, or I want to convince you of this, or whatever. It is worth noting, of course, that governor players, as every players can trade their stats in order to try and accomplish things. Now, this can come in the form of currency, but that's not actually currency's purpose. Currency's purpose is to build and maintain objects within regions or within zones, which I'll discuss in a minute. Let's talk about the stats for players. Every player now has 2 stats. Secrecy, which is basically your ability to keep other people from seeing what you're doing secretly, and your ability to find out what other people are doing secretly. In addition to that, you have the influence stat. Now, influence is basically your health. It is something you have to utilize in order to cast. You probably already understand, but just to make sure this is fully understood, especially for any prospective players who want to join us in the future, your influence stat is what you as a person, in almost every respect of the government, spend in order to accomplish things like passing laws, or enacting new edicts, or trying to push new regimes, or just basically anything that doesn't involve building something. And in some cases, even building something will cost some influence. The reason I say your influence is your health is it's also a measure of exactly how liked and how popular you are with the people that are under you. If your influence gets to about the 10 mark, which a lot of players are at right now, you are considered to be in danger. That means every single time, if I could get the right die, there we go. I don't want to misrepresent, it's a d20. Every time you try to do something, anything, at 10 or lower, I have to roll. If the dice go against you, thanks to your current influence stat, you can't do it. It doesn't happen. The people don't do it. When you get down to 5 influence or lower, not only are you doing this at a severe penalty, because each step lower of influence makes it harder to pass the dice roll, at 5 or lower, each action now also involves another dice roll of the possibility of a revolt and the people supplanting you. So keeping your influence high is a big deal. There are many ways to push influence up. They're kind of the obvious things. I don't really want to cover them in specifics here, but several players have already come up with ideas like trying to pass things that people like, or trying to push things that people like. But those only usually get you a little bit of influence, because the way the system is designed is you're supposed to have a small amount of influence coming in and a fairly decent amount of influence going out. Now that may sound unbalanced, but hear me out. We have added 2 new positions that are defined to make things more modular. These positions can come and go at will, and these are designed for players who don't have the ability to post every frickin' day. These are delegates and, well, mayors. Mayor is actually kind of an inaccurate term, but it's kind of stuck. I'm sorry, Carbon. Delegates are effectively ministers of a particular form of the government. For example, I know right now one of the players, Cool Kid, is petitioning to be a delegate of foreign affairs. This means they're in charge of X faction of the government and do whatever it is that that particular thing would involve. Now, they can't supplant the governors. In fact, they technically can't do much in their own right. However, what they can do is, for example, let's say the the delegate of foreign affairs goes to the Council of Governors and say, I want to push this peace treaty this trade treaty with Australia. The Council of Governors could say, well, I don't know if I'm in favor of that. Delegates are given a special type of thing in order to enable them to take actions. See, each delegate has an influence bar. Just like, it's the same influence stat that everyone else has, but it functions a little bit differently because a delegate can't actually really spend influence per se. If a delegate comes up with an idea for being able to spend influence, I'll listen to it. But the idea is that's there for them to trade with other players. So a delegate can go to several of the governors and say, hey, I'll trade you 3 influence and I'll trade you 2 influence. And in so doing, you'll lean in my direction on this one. And they're like, yeah, okay, I think I'd go with that. And that way they can then influence policies and treaties and all sorts of things like that. The way it's different is delegates are a source of influence. They have an influence cap. That's why I keep doing this particular gesture here. That cap varies depending on how many delegates are playing right now. It's deliberately malleable. The initial cap is probably going to be about 5. That means every turn they are refilled to 5 influence. They can never go above 5 influence under any circumstances whatsoever. Or above the cap under any circumstances whatsoever. That influence is fully refilled every turn. So that delegate then has 5 influence, or whatever number, to spend every turn, and then at the end of the turn, it refills right back up. Now, influence is only really useful to players, hence creating a direct link in gameplay between delegates and governors and mayors, which brings me to mayors. Mayors are in charge of a city or a district or a region or an area, or something below a governor stat. The term mayor isn't actually 100% accurate. Mayoral gameplay is actually almost identical to governor gameplay in terms of the building concept. You get a list of stats, science, security, all the things I mentioned earlier, and you have a currency. The differences are as follows. A mayor isn't really necessary for the functioning of the entire government or nation or whatever. And again, you don't need to be someone who can post every day in order to be a mayor. Furthermore, you are making stuff on a much smaller scale. A regional governor might say, I want to build schools across the whole region, which will be a hugely expensive thing. A mayor might say, well, I want to build schools across my city. Much cheaper, right? In general, the stats of a mayor are going to be much smaller than the stats of a region. And let's say, for example, we have 3 mayors under, say, Southport. Those 3 mayors and their cities or their regions add up to the stats of the greater one. Their stats add to the governor's stats. So the governor has a vested interest in making sure those mayors are doing what he wants, even though they don't technically have to. Here's the catch. Mayors also generate influence in the exact same manner that delegates do. They have a cap. It refills every turn. However, they cannot produce currency on their own. Only governors can produce currency through taxation or whatever else. So a mayor has to work with the governor in order to produce currency, which is required in order to build. This is how we balance these 3 roles out. These are the majority of the changes. Now, there's a couple of extraneous things on top of here. For example, I know at least one player, I don't know if he's actually active anymore, I haven't seen him post in a bit, was a diplomat. He is basically playing D&D at that point. He is playing an individual who is going off on adventures. It's of a more political tint than going into dungeons. Although which one's more dangerous is a little bit debatable. Anyways, so that's available. That's also available for spies. We've already had at least one player who was a spy, who was again going on missions, D&D style. He has since become the new director of the intelligence community, which brings me another thing. The head of intelligence and the military are kind of separate from all of the things I just mentioned, and they each have kind of their own completely separate gameplay things that attach to the main country, the main federal thing. The only real attachment is the fact that the Council of Governors decides how much money is given from the National Bank to these 2 groups, and then they can then spend that on whatever it is that they choose to. And I have a completely separate gameplay mode for doing battles. You can ask Warwager, Griffin, or Bradley. All 3 of them have actually already done battles under my system, which is basically done live. I get in a chat channel, and I'm like, okay, this happens. And then I toss up a picture on my website that's like, here's the battle plan, and you can actually see the map and figure out what's happening. So that's another thing. I do believe that's about it. As ever, if there's any questions or comments, please feel free to comment here or in the forum. And if anybody's interested in joining our new, slightly more board gamey, but still politically and still roleplay-y game, you are absolutely welcome to. The doors are still open as of right now. So, I hope to see you around, guys.